That includes all of you. My job is to tell everyone how to code things securely, and then sulk when David Fowler just ignores all of my advice and does whatever the hell he wants. And when they get it wrong, I am the person that is on the end of all the MSRC emails that tries to get a developer to fix things, because I don't write code anymore. Well, not very much, and trust me, you don't ever want to use it. And then I have to cope with all the Patch Tuesday issues, and I will be talking more about that this afternoon. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Blowdart. It is not very work-focused. It has lots of swearings, the odd dog pics, and then, you know, links to Reggie the dinosaur. So I'm going to talk about what we have done for security in .NET Core. How many of you are not using .NET Core yet? Again, I would ask why not, but Scandinavian audience, so I'm never going to get an answer. So this will all be new to you. So for those of you that have seen some of this stuff before, you're going to see it again whilst I explain it to everyone else in the audience who has not seen it, and hopefully that will then encourage them to move forward to .NET Core. With .NET Core 3.0, we're bringing a bunch of stuff back, like WinForms, WPF, a bunch of really unhappy security classes, but hopefully it removes a lot of your blockers for moving forward to .NET Core 3, because that's where all our major investments will be. I should make it clear that .NET Framework is not dead. It is just completed. It won't be getting very many new features. It'll get TLS 1.3 because you know, everyone will complain if it doesn't. But it's not going to get a lot of new features, and you won't get any of the new language features in the next version of .NET Framework. You want all the cool new C# stuff? Yeah, you've got to move to Core. So start planning for that. We are aware that there are gaps, especially in things like WCF and stuff like that. But the gaps will eventually get filled. So when .NET Core started, Fowler comes along to me and says, hey, I'd like to write a web server, which makes security people really, really happy, because we're like, we have a perfectly good web server. Yes, but it's not cross-platform. Well, I don't care about Linux, and Linux has other web servers. No, we need a cross-platform web story. So Kestrel came along. And in 2.0, Kestrel, which is the web server, we have HTTPS on by default. There is an option to turn it off. If you hit security in puppies and kittens, you can untick that box and turn off HTTPS if you're a horrible person, but just don't. I mean, we will generate a development certificate for you when you install the SDK. There's no real reason stopping you using this. We will even trust it for you on Windows. So you should be moving to HTTPS along with the rest of the web. So we have it all done in config, everything in base environment settings. So it used to be that you would set whether you were in production mode or environment mode in config files. Config files are dumb because people upload the wrong config files to their production server, which is why you see yellow screens of death with full stack dumps everywhere. Now everything is done in environment variables because that's what everything else did. Thank you, Node, for that. So we have HTTPS configuration. It can also do automatic pulling things out based on subject name and expiry date. And as I say, we can generate certificates for you using the .NET tools. You type .NET space devcerts, and we will clean everything out. We will generate you a nice self-signed HTTPS certificate. And if you are on Windows, we will prompt you to trust it. If you're on Linux, you're on your own, because Linux has no good real security story around a lot of things, and certainly not around certificates. We also have support for SNI. So SNI is when you have the ability to serve multiple HTTPS certificates on a single IP address without having to know a host header. Here is how everything fits together. Now, normally I have demos for these, but it's like, I only have 40 minutes rather than the usual hour. And even with the lack of Q&A time, I'm having to cut this down. So if you want to see demos for this sort of thing, there are recordings of previous talks that I've given that you can grab off my website. But the nice thing about the SNI certificate selection is that if you really want Let's Encrypt support, you could sort of use this to push Let's Encrypt support through, and there will be a demo for that in 3.0 because I've got it half written. and it will hopefully be done by them. So like any web server, there are a bunch of configuration options. These are the important ones. These are not all of them. That allow you to tweak how your web server will respond. In .NET Core 1, we recommended that you did not expose Kestrel to the internet directly. Put it behind a proxy, put it behind IIS, put it behind Nginx. Doesn't matter. Let everything forward through. In 2.0, despite my sulking, Fowler goes, okay, we think this is secure enough. And so a lot of these options have come out of how you can secure a web server. We've stolen things from Nginx. We've stolen things from IIS. We use reasonably sensible defaults, but depending on your environment, you may want to tweak things. And here are all the things that you can tweak. Personally, because I am paranoid and because Kestrel is reasonably new code, it's the newest web server on the block, I would still put it behind a proxy because the proxies generally tend to be more secure and better pen tested. But we've had a bunch of external pen testers come through and beat up Kestrel and catch most of the things, and then because .NET Core is not attached to Windows, it doesn't ship with Windows, when we do patch things, we can get a patch out in about a month once it goes through all the testing. We also have support for built-in redirection up to HTTPS, which of course, because you're not turning HTTPS off, because you do like puppies and kittens, especially the puppies that are wandering around here, we have automatic HTTPS redirection, and you can sort of like tweak it based on what the status code you want to push and the port that you want to redirect to. And we have support for HSTS. HSTS is a header that says, next time you visit me, even if the user has typed in HTTP rather than HTTPS, ignore them. We will always go to HTTPS. Now, HSTS is dangerous. These are all the things that you should be sure of before enabling HSTS, because it is cached in the browser in awkward places to clear. If your certificate expires and you have had an HSTS header on it, browsers will throw up security warnings that the user cannot get past. So you need to be sure that you've got all your subdomains covered. How fast can you change your certificate? Does your certificate auto-renew? As I found out last year when Azure certificate auto-renewal failed on me, which ended up with me sending angry emails, and they were like, oh. Or if your CA becomes untrusted because they've done some horrible things and Google is going, we're not including you in Chrome anymore. Yeah, HSTS is dangerous. So in production, you should probably let the HSTS flag cache itself for maybe 5 seconds to start off with. Work your way up to an hour after about a week. Work your way up to a day after about 3 months, and spin it up to eventually, when you want to get there, you want to have your HSTS flag cached for a year. So what we do is we default to 30 days, which is a horrible compromise between the year that you want to aim for and the hour that you want to start off with, because people forget. So 30 days is a bad compromise between you testing and you completely forgetting to set it at all. So when you turn HSTS on, you are committing that none of these things will ever go wrong. How much do you trust your IT people? How much do you trust your DevOps scripts? It's a great thing, but you need to get it right. So that's just the hosting part of things. Authentication-wise, we have a few options in Core. We have, when you do file new project, we have a bunch of things in the templates. We have no authentication. We have individual user accounts, which is ASP.NET Identity, where we have a database and a myriad of fat classes around it that will support logging in and logging out and a bunch of other stuff. We have work and school accounts, which is Azure AD, and we have Windows Authentication, which is the integrated Kerberos authentication that you should use in intranets. Note that it says Windows Authentication. That works on Windows. I have spent the last month and a half on customer calls trying to figure out why people want Windows Authentication on Linux and inside Linux containers. So eventually this will change from Windows Authentication to Kerberos Authentication, when I can get that working on Linux, which will be quite fun. We also have a bunch of built-in social authentication things. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Google, we have Microsoft account, and just general OAuth, and there are a myriad of weird-ass OAuth providers in the ASP contrib repository. There are hundreds. There are loads of things that I have never even heard of. I'm honestly not sure we should bother including Twitter anymore, because trying to write an application and get it approved by Twitter is a 6-month process, as I found out when I was doing a lab a couple of months ago, and Twitter had changed everything without notice, so no one could create a Twitter account. So, individual user accounts in 2 and 2.1. It's the database, the models around the database, and everything around it. So you are hosting everything locally. For those of you that are dealing with GDPR right now, you will be going, I really don't want to do that. I want it to be someone else's problem. So we can do that. We can let you use Azure B2C, and that's built into the box. And you don't like Azure, you can replace it with other third-party options like Identity Server, ASOS, OpenIDICT. You can go to Auth0 or any of those other ones. I don't particularly care, because frankly, storing your own usernames and passwords in this day and age is a horrible idea. And for those of you that are stuck in government or banking, we brought back WS-Fed, because people don't want to move off a standard that's 15 years old. So the individual user accounts, it's all your local database. We are going to be very opinionated about this. We don't allow you to choose how passwords are stored. We are going to do it for you. We tweak those algorithms with every release if we think they're no longer safe. And you can start, this is the database that Identity Server uses behind the scenes as well. So you can plug Identity Server into the mix and do authentication via OIDC. And then we have our work and school accounts. Again, this is all OIDC based. And then Windows Authentication, which does need IIS. For those of you that are coming from .NET Framework, it used to be when you clicked Windows Authentication, it would impersonate the user automatically. So when a user came in, then it would spawn off another process, and that process would be run under the user security context. We don't do that anymore because it was silly. And the way that you impersonate users has changed from the .NET Framework, because that thing was an entire pit of failure. You would try and impersonate a user, you would not wrap it in a try-catch or in a using, and then if exceptions were thrown, the security context would flow up to your exception handler, which is probably not what you expected. And so now it's a lot more constrained and a lot cleaner. We don't have anything based on principle anymore. You can't have your own custom identity principle. Everything is now a claims principle, because claims is where everything is going. We also have the support, finally, for multiple authentication middleware for those of you moving from Framework to Core. So you can have multiple ways of allowing users to log in easily. And the authorization can cherry pick which one it wants to use. So you could have JOT as the authentication scheme for your APIs, but only one of them can run automatically. And in 1.0, we really screwed that up. There was a flag on every single authentication middleware that said, hey, I'm the one that wants to run automatically. And so people would set it on more than one, because no one reads the documentation. And that got you into what I will euphemistically call an unsupported state. Or if I'm more honest, it's we don't know what the hell's going to happen now. And for those of you coming from .NET Framework, Cookie Authentication finally understands the difference between unauthenticated and forbidden, so you can have different screens. So in 2.0, because we have that horrible screw up with which one is going to be active and which ones are going to be passive, we changed everything, because that's what we like to do. Core broke enough people, we thought we'd just do it again in 2.0. You're going to love 3.0 as well. But there are no security changes in 3.0. It just breaks everywhere else. So there's no individual authentication middleware anymore. We have authentication as a single service, and you configure everything for that service. And then because it's a single service, you configure the one that says this is active, this is my default authentication, and that's it. There's no more overlapping, and we don't get ourselves into a mess. So this is how we add things. We just have services.add and app.useAuthentication, and then we sort of tweak things like this. We have add authentication that has all of these default things, so I can set the default challenge scheme, which is what do I call when someone isn't authenticated and they want to go somewhere. Default sign-in, well, how's the sign-in going to work? Who am I going to delegate that to? And then defaults for everything else. It all gets a little bit complicated. And to do things manually, you just call context.authenticate or challenge or sign in with the name of the service that you want, that you've set in configuration. And you can do it yourself. Look, I know some people don't like our ASP.NET identity, or some of you are stuck with really, really old databases that you can't migrate. So you can do everything manually, but you still need somewhere to store the identity, and obviously that is going to be cookies for most of the web. So we documented finally how you could use all the cookie bits and pieces manually without ASP.NET identity. So it will do automatic encryption and signatures of a user's identity, so they can't change the cookie to say admin equals true. It uses data protection, so you can sync the encryption keys between servers using a standard service, and you can just serialize your own claims identity and then authenticate the subsequent requests rather than have to roll it your own. So here's how we would sort of configure it for manual stuff. We have things like options login path, which is where you log in, access denied, which is forbidden, and then you sign in using the scheme name and give it a user principal and sign out using the scheme name. I would highly recommend using this stuff rather than rolling your own. Problem is, if you do it like this, once a cookie is dropped, it's the sole source of truth. That's where we read the identity from. We don't go back to a database, because who wants a database hit on every single request? That would be a bit of a nightmare. So we have a validator, and a validator is something you wire into the cookie middleware that can look at the principal that's come in and decide whether they need refreshing or rejecting. So we do this in ASP.NET Identity if someone changes a password, if someone changes a bunch of information that we would use for password reset prompts, emails, things like that. And that changes. And then about every 30 minutes we cache it. We will go back and say, oh, it's been 30 minutes. I'm going to just refresh the user's information. And you can tweak that sort of thing. Validators are simple enough. You implement validate async. And then inside there, you just make your decision to see if a refresh is needed or whether you want to reject the user and kick them out. And then you just wire them up in the events on the options, because this is how we do everything in Core. So when I initially spec'd this out and we had support for multiple authentication types, the original thought was you would specify the authentication type that you want in the authorize attribute or in your authorization policy, which we'll come to in a minute. And I thought that was wonderful, and I thought that would cover everybody's needs. But apparently users are far more awkward than I had thought. People want to make decisions based on paths of a request, which is what we told people never to do when you move to MVC. You move from web forms to MVC, because now you can get to your controller multiple ways. But no, you just want to ignore all our good advice and make decisions based on path or make decisions based on hostname for whatever reason that you have to make me upset. So in 2.1, I give up. I went, all right, if you want to make bad life choices, I will support you making bad life choices. And we have two different ways to make this bad life choice. We have the concept of virtual schemes and authentication forwarding. So, authentication forwarding is when you set up each authentication type, cookies, JOT, OIDC, Facebook, Twitter, Yandex, whatever. You can put options.forward defaults selector in there. And so when a request comes in, you can use that to look at whatever you want on the request, be it hostname or path, and redirect to, for example, the API scheme. And you do this in every single scheme which is really flexible, but also really painful. Instead, I much prefer virtual schemes. So a scheme is just a name for the authentication type that you have wired up. And with virtual schemes, what we are doing here, we're add authentication, and we're going to say the default scheme that you want to use is called virtual scheme. It could be anything. And then you call add policy scheme then you give it the scheme name, virtual scheme, so that the two of them match up. And then in the options here, you can do a central selection of everything that you want. So rather than put it on every single individual service, set up a virtual scheme and then have your picker here. So I'm going to look at the path, and it's an API path, therefore I'm going to swap to JOT. Otherwise, I'm going to just default out to cookie. So if you don't like the wonderful design I had originally, you can do this. We also have been a little bit slack. In .NET Framework, you could have a web API with individual authentication where we had an OIDC, well, it wasn't OIDC at that point, it was OAuth, an OAuth server embedded in your project, so you could get some tokens out. And I never really liked that server. It was minimal. It didn't do half the scenarios that people want, so I killed it. And again, your users are more fussy than I expected, and you all went, no, I'd like one of those. And so we went, well, there's Identity Server over there. Dominic and Brock are really nice people. I have their stickers. They buy me lunch every now and again, just so I can say things like this. That's not true. If legal sees this recording, dear legal, that's not true at all. They buy me lunch because I buy them lunch, and it's a rotating thing. So after 2.2 is released, probably about a month after, you will see Web API individual authentication templates and hopefully React templates and Angular templates that have Identity Server built in. We are not going to write our own anymore. Not when Brock and Dominic do a bunch of work and it's open source and it's well loved. We thought about doing it ourselves, and then the community told us what a really bad idea that was, which was great because then we could say, okay, well, we're going to go use Identity Server. This probably will make a bunch of banks and governments a little bit leery. It's hard to push open source into some corporations, but this is kind of a steering thing. We're saying, okay, we Microsoft trust Identity Server. We Microsoft trust this open source project, that open source project. We trust it so much that we are putting it on our templates, and we will provide first line support for it, like we do with all of our developer products. So you will have probably in a few months. It's sort of getting tweaked and finished now. We're writing the templates. You will have Identity Server in an out-of-band template. It will come after the 2.2 release. You'll just have to install a few more extra things. And then you can do File New Project Web API with individual authentication. And we have Identity Server in there. How many of you have tried to configure Identity Server? How many of you have thought it was incredibly easy? There's one hand going up of someone I know, and Philip, you're a liar. So part of the integration is we will set everything up for you. We have come up with defaults based on conventions, based on names of your projects and where things lie. So you won't have to worry about generating keys. You won't have to worry about setting up clients, client IDs, scopes, anything like that. We will have a simple 2 to 3 line integration in configuration where we set it up for you. But you can then go from that to the full power of this battle station. No, sorry, not a battle station. That's Star Wars. Of Identity Server. So we are wrapping things, we are hiding things, we are making them easier. But then as your requirements grow from having everything in the same project, or you want to do something other than a forms-based login using identity, you'll be able to configure it and change it, and there will be a bunch of documentation for that. But as with most, as with all of our templates, we give you a good starting point that gets you up and running when you hit F5, and it will be there for Identity Server with a couple of lines of code. I was hoping to show it to you, but it's mid-change yet again. So I mentioned data protection before, and data protection is, well, in web.config, we used to have this machine key element, which was the encryption key that you would use for cookies and a bunch of other stuff. And it was horrible to change because you had to change it on every single machine at the same time. Otherwise, if you were load balancing, one machine would accept a cookie and another one wouldn't. So we replaced that. We threw it all away with data protection. So data protection is a keyring that you share between all your machines via a database, via Redis, via a shared file share. I honestly don't care. You can write your own. It's only like it's two bits of an interface to implement. So it's aimed, again, like machine key was, at ephemeral data, so data that you don't mind losing, but we'll sort of hold your hand and try and make it hard to abuse if you want to use it for data you're going to store. So it will rotate keys automatically for you. It starts off with every 3 months. It isolates applications automatically, so you can share a key ring between different applications, and then you'll have one thing to back up, and we have a bunch of stuff around purposes. It attempts to figure out where to store keys based on your app platform. It doesn't do it particularly well. But you can easily write new key stores, and if you are Russian, you can have custom algorithms. Trust me, that's only for Russia. You don't want to touch that with a barge pole. Here we have it. We add it. We configure it. We have where the key ring is. So here I'm going to persist it to the file system. And then we have how we protect the keys. In this case, it's going to be a certificate, but you can use Azure Key Vault. And then we have an application name that we set that provides the isolation. And then if you want to do it yourself, you call, you inject a data protection provider, then you create a protector of it, and then you call protect and unprotect. Nice and easy. You don't get a lot of choice in this. We're going to choose key sizes. We're going to choose hashing algorithms. We're going to choose signing algorithms. We're going to choose encryption algorithms. You don't get to tweak that because we don't trust you. These things are hard to get right, and if we do everything for you, then at least we can support a migration path up to the next version. So for those of you that are still on .NET Framework and have not used .NET Core, how many of you have ended up writing custom authorized attributes? It was not fun. And so in .NET Core, we threw away custom authorized attributes. You don't get to do them anymore. Now, because this is a quick run through and I only have 40 minutes, there is a workshop for this at the bottom on my GitHub that will walk you through how we build all these things. The slides will be on my website by the end of the day, along with the other ones, so you don't have to take that many photographs. Just remember idunno.org, idunno.org, and you can grab them from there. So custom authorized attributes were horrible, and everyone kind of got it wrong, and I wanted to do away with it. So we're now doing everything, well, in code. Probably the easiest way is to talk this through. So we have requirements. I have a requirement that allows people to enter an office. If you go to Microsoft Offices, you have people who have their employee badges, and that's one way of fulfilling the requirement to enter the office. And then you have visitor badges. The visitor badges at Corp are really cool now. They fade out over the day. So it starts off with, I think, a logo, and eventually it fades out, and you're just left with the Space Needle so you know when they're expired. But having a visitor badge is another way of fulfilling a requirement to enter an office. So you have requirements, and then we have handlers. So we would have, am I an employee handler? Well, I'm going to check their badge and make sure it's a permanent employee badge and it has not expired and the employee hasn't been fired. Or if they're a visitor, I'm going to look at their visitor badge and make sure that it's still valid for today and they are with the person that they're supposed to be with. So two different ways to fulfill a requirement. So two different handlers. And then we have policies. And so for building entry, we will set a policy up that has one or more requirements. So here we just have our office entry requirement, which in turn may have one or more handlers. And then I'm going to register the handler in DI, which is what I always forget to do when I'm live coding, and then I get very confused. If you don't register it in DI, it doesn't work. And then authorizing, I just specify the policy name, and it goes back, and it runs the requirements. It runs through each handler for a requirement. So instead of sticking code in a custom attribute, it goes in the handler. And handlers are easily unit testable. And handlers can be reused, so you could have an admin handler where an admin can do anything, and then you just mark that handler as fulfilling multiple requirements. If you're using Razor Pages, here's how we do authorization in Razor Pages. So we will set up authorized folder, and then I can specify the policy on the page model. One limitation with Razor Pages is we can only set a policy on the entire page model rather than individual controller methods. So I have a demo for this. This is my one and only demo because I have 40 minutes. And I've got 5 left. Oh, good Lord. Yeah, we're running over. Deal with it. It's only lunch. You can wait. All right, let's see if this works. So I try and customize this one for wherever I am. So here we have, eventually, when it starts, come on, I know you want to. Why don't we look at the code behind it? So I'm going to have an audience requirement, and the audience requirement will have a single parameter. We can have an audience action on it, and the audience action will be whether the audience wants to speak, or whether if you're American, or the audience wants to stay silent if you're Scandinavian. So have we got, there we go. So behind ask questions and don't ask questions are 2 different controller methods. And ask questions, I have the requirement that you are capable of speaking, and behind don't ask questions, I have the requirement that says no, you're Scandinavian. So if I hit go here to ask questions, it's going to ask me to log in, and I can choose to be American, and it will allow me through. Because I am American and I will speak at conferences, and my God, they will never shut up. If I go back, I'm still American. If I go to don't ask questions, which is the can you be silent requirement, no, that doesn't work. So if I sign out, if I ask questions and say I am Swedish, the last time I did this, it was at NDC, and I got the Swedish and Norwegian flags mixed up, and they were not happy with me. But I'm trying to speak at a conference, but I'm Swedish. Doesn't work. If I go back, don't ask questions, it does work. I can't stand out from the crowd. So we have a requirement, and then in the requirement we have an authorized handler. And what the authorized handler is going to do is it's going to look at the current user. It's going to yank out what country they're from, and then I'm going to look at the parameter that I'm going to do. If I'm Swedish and I'm trying to speak, I'm doing nothing because we can't succeed at this part. If I'm anything other than Swedish, I will succeed, and then vice versa. If you're trying to stay silent, Americans can't stay quiet. So, been through that bit. So a handler calls context.succeed if the current requirements have succeeded. If the current requirements haven't succeeded, you should just do nothing at all. Don't return anything. Because, like I say, there may be multiple handlers for a requirement, so another handler may succeed. There is context.fail, but that's just there for horrific circumstances. It's like something really bad has happened. I don't want the request to continue at all. Even if there are other handlers, I don't care. I just want to say this person has just been fired, or they shouldn't be in the country. Stop it and stop there. You can also do imperative checks. So you can take the iAuthOrization service in your controller. You can call authorize async with your policies. We have resource-based authorization, where you can pass in something like a document on top of this. And again, this is all in the lab, so you can do it not just based on the current user, but on the resource that they are trying to access. So we have a document with an author in it, and if the author is the current user, they can do whatever they want. Otherwise, they can just read the document. And we can do this whole limiting by schemes in policy, like I said, but none of you are ever going to do now that we've given you virtual schemes. And if you're a really horrible person, you can adjust your views. In Razor, you can inject the authorization service into Razor and then put if statements in your Razor views and show and hide things based on that. If you're a sensible person, you'll do it with a view model, because view models are a lot cleaner. But people don't. People like doing the quick and dirty stuff. It's just always, obviously, it's important to remember to duplicate the checks in the code behind your views as well. Identity. In 2.1, we started hiding identity away in a NuGet package, so it has all the UI in a NuGet package. You can scaffold it out. You can click on the projects and do add new scaffolded item. You can use that to add identity later. Currently, scaffolded identity only scaffolds things out as Razor pages rather than classic MVC. We have heard your dislike about that. I've got a bunch of, when I get back, I have a bunch of customer phone calls to listen to angry customers who want classic MVC support as well. It was a matter of time more than anything else, so it'll hopefully come back in 3. I just need to prioritize it against a bunch of other stuff. We also have GDPR. You are the only audience that I've talked to that will give a damn about GDPR, because I've been talking to Australians and Americans since we introduced this feature. There are extension points for data downloads and deletion. There are extension points for encrypting data at rest, although I'd much rather you would use a database that encrypts for you, because that's way less effort and less fraught from danger. There is a sample on how to do it on GitHub, and we have support for two-factor authentication via authenticator apps, be it Google or Microsoft or Auth0 or whatever one you want. So GDPR, we have full support for those annoying consent dialogues that I have been seeing every day for sites that I visit on a regular basis. But now they went, hey, you're in Europe, so I should pretend to care about your privacy. Cookies have built-in support for saying I am an essential cookie for a site to function, or I am not an essential cookie. By default, temp data and session cookies are marked as not essential, because after lots of months and months of discussions with lawyers about this, where lawyers would not make a damn decision at all, because they don't like doing that, because then they can be blamed. They're like, okay, well, here are the options that we have. You should choose one. All right. So we decided that your site should at least be able to load its homepage without using temp data and session data. So if you want to move to temp data and session data, that's the point where users have to consent for you to drop cookies. So you can configure the cookie options. You can put a lambda in options.check consent needed. You can mark cookies with is essential equals true. There are demos in the docs website for this. And then you can pop a cookie banner, and we have support for this in the templates by default, which really annoys Americans, because the first thing they do is rip it all out. But that's Americans for you. So you can show a banner, and you can have your consent cookies, and then the whole, am I an essential cookie, am I a non-essential cookie thing will work behind the scenes without you having to do much. So that was a very quick run through. I realize it's lunchtime. I also realize I don't need to stop for Q&A because you're Scandinavian. So that was a nice quick run through. There are longer versions of this on my website. There are labs that will talk you through authentication and authorization and some of the GDPR support on my GitHub repo. I would strongly recommend that you look at those, especially if you're coming to the authorization pieces for the first time. It's a nice step-by-step piece that will walk you through how you don't have to use custom attributes anymore. I would like to say thank you very much. If you have questions, I realize security questions are not things that people want to ask generally. You can always drop me emails. I'm absolutely fine with that. But I won't answer till next week because I get to visit my mother tomorrow, and she has a grand total of 2 megabits per second living in the depths of Ireland. So yeah, I'm not answering emails for a few days. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.